You've reached and who am I? Ginger Hawn Cooper, the Determined Genealogist. And today we're on lesson number 4 about my dad. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about you a little while. I'm doing this to help people, to help them find their ancestors. I'm doing this series to help you to know where to look for software that you can put your genealogy in, that you can attach documents to, that you can save your information. I'm doing this also to help you to fill out the necessary forms so you know how to do it. A lot of people get things mixed up because genealogy can be kind of confusing. And so I want to share with you the things that I've learned, and I want to share with you doing things in a cost-effective way because genealogy can be very expensive. And research can. I hate to think how much money I've spent on it. But I love it. It's like detective work, and I've learned things out about my family, and I love that, and I cherish that. And I cherish the things that I've found. But this is about you, and it's about ways that I can help you in your research. You know, oh, I'm stuck on my grandfather. Oh, I don't know my grandfather. I don't know what happened to my grandmother. I don't know what happened to my dad. You know, and sometimes the endings are good. Sometimes the endings are not good. It just depends. But everybody's family is different, and everybody's ancestry is different, and that's what makes us all unique and different. But I'm going to tell you about my dad. Okay, now he was born the first son of a Methodist minister. Now, for 4 generations, supposedly, but I found out otherwise, for 3 generations, they had all been Methodist ministers, the oldest son. Some of the other sons, too. But he came from that line of heritage. And my grandmother also, she came from a long line of people in the United States who helped form the United States. So I've got a rich heritage. And my dad grew up, and he was kind of a rascal because most ministers' kids are, not all, but most are, you know, because they're expected to be better kids and stuff, and people watch all the time. But anyway, he grew up like that, and he was very, very intelligent, and a local doctor gave him a scholarship, my dad, to go to college with the condition that he become a medical doctor. So my father, at the age of 17, went off to Simpson College there in Iowa. They were living in Iowa. He was born there. Anyway, before he did, his family and a girl's family that my dad kind of grew up with them. He grew up with this girl, and the families were very close. Well, Daddy asked the girl to marry him. It was kind of expected. It was kind of an arranged thing, which even in this day, my dad's day and age, seemed kind of odd. But he asked her to marry him, bought her a ring, and then he went off to college. And when he was in college, his second year, the war broke out, World War II. And he wanted to enlist. He wanted to go in the military. He wanted to fight for our country. He was very patriotic, as also my family. We come from a long lines of people that love the Constitution, love the United States, and love what our country stands for. And he went ahead and tried to sign up, and they wouldn't take him because he had bad eyes. So he ended up working and getting a job, going to an eye doctor and getting his eyes fixed where they were better. Got glasses, and he tried again in November, and he ended up being able to go in. And because he had studied biology, he became a surgical tech or a hospital nurse, and they trained him. He went out to Texas first for boot training, and then he joined the Army, and then he went to Fitzsimmons in Denver, Colorado, and he trained there for the surgical part. Now, when he was there, he went to buy his fiancée some nuts. This is a true story. And he went there, and behind the counter was this long-legged beauty named my mom, June Hawn, or June Lane. And she was selling nuts. And Daddy walks up, and he buys nuts for his fiance. That's how they met. And they started hanging out. Mom was getting over a broken relationship, and she wasn't looking for anyone. And my dad, of course, was engaged. They were both 19. And they just hung out together all the time. They became the best of friends. And Mom remembers, this is one good story my mom told me, that they were walking through Denver, and you could see the hump on her back. And she used to cringe and kind of slouch because Daddy was shorter than her. And Daddy said, June, why are you slouching? And she said, because I'm shorter than you look. And he said, I don't care. He said, I don't care. That you need to stand up. You're beautiful. And he said, don't worry about that hump on your back. He said, you're beautiful just the way you are. And then he told her about being shorter. He said, well, it doesn't bother me at all if a woman's taller, because I always wanted tall children. My dad was 5'5.5", okay, so he was short. And Mom was 5'6", not a lot taller, but some. So anyway, they got close, and then he went home on leave to Iowa, and this is a story he told. And he went home on leave, and he asked his fiancée for them to go out, and she said, I'm sorry, I've got a date for prom, I don't want to break it. And so she went out with this other guy, so Daddy decided that was it. He didn't want her. So he came back to Denver and asked Mama to marry him. And Mama agreed. But he didn't tell his family. He didn't tell anybody on that side. And I know that because my cousins have given me letters. He writes home and he never mentions my mom. He never does. He even asks about his fiance. He said, I haven't heard about my heart so-and-so, my heart throb or whatever in months. What's going on with her? Oh, the stories you can tell, right? So he gets transferred to San Francisco, and he becomes, before he gets the ship, he becomes a non-commissioned officer in charge of supplies out in San Francisco. And my mom transferred. She got a job with Western Union and worked with the Red Cross, and she moved to Los Angeles, where her adoptive dad was and her sister was. So they're both out in California, and they're still dating. They dated for 2 more years. And this whole time, Dad never mentions it to his family. I know I've got the letters that he wrote, some of the letters. He never mentions it. So it gets close to the end of the war. Now, my dad served out on what they call the USS Sea Barb. Here he is on the Sea Barb. You could see him right there. That was him and his dad and his brother. That was Daddy. And here was the Sea Barb. Now, there was more than one Sea Barb in World War II. It was a transport ship. And he worked there in the operations surgical wing, helping wounded warriors, wounded military. And he went to the Philippines. He was at the Philippines First Landing. He was also helped liberate in Japan. He served there too. Anyway, in July, when he got leave, he came back. His ship sunk, and they had to rescue him. Something was in front of it. A couple of men came and rescued him on the Sea Barb because it got sunk. So anyway, they got Daddy out of the infirmary because something had gotten in front of it, a big box where he could not move it, and they saved him. And he still had his arms full of supplies. That's what he went down there for, because he knew the men would need it with the ship sinking. But anyway, he came home on leave, and he married my mom on July 30th, 1945, out in Los Angeles. But when he did, here's their wedding picture. Mama was taller, so she sat down and he stood up. But that is their wedding picture, and you can tell my mom was a very, very pretty woman. And Daddy was short and stocky. But that's her wedding picture. And before he got married, he told his dad that he was getting married, and he said, can you come and marry us? Because his dad was a minister. His dad said no. No one from the family came to the wedding. And I think they were pretty shocked and pretty upset because he just kind of left his bride hanging there, you know. So that happened. And then Daddy, after the war ended, he served another 6 months out on a ship coming in. And when he came back to Iowa, and Mom moved to Iowa. What are you chewing on? Does that shirt taste good? She's chewing on that. See, I've noticed her sometimes. I'm watching you. See, look. I see you. Anyway, she's tired. But anyway, is your eye itching? She's got allergies too, bless her heart. But he came home and he sent my mom to live in Iowa also. Right before, when they married, he sent her to Iowa to live with his family so she'd get to know him. But that didn't help much. They were kind of mean to her from what Mama said. I don't know because I wasn't there. So he comes back to Iowa and he goes back to Simpson College, and they both went to Simpson College. Here was Daddy and Mama. You could see that he was shorter and she was taller, but they were very happy. They had a good marriage at this point. And he went ahead and went back to school. But he did not go back to become a medical doctor. He had VA benefits at this time, and he became, I don't know why he didn't become a doctor, except maybe what he went through in the war, because he had to help so many people. And I think that was really hard on him, seeing all the people, you know, and helping them when they were wounded and stuff. I don't know. I just know that he didn't want to be a doctor anymore. And so he became an educator. He became a teacher and then a principal. And when he did this too, in 1947, which I found that record, he joined back up in the reserves of the Army and worked there. And he also became a minister. And I'm not real sure why he became a minister, except maybe to appease his family, because it was a first son thing. But I remember him telling me I became a minister because my dad, I was called my dad, not God, which is kind of sad. But he did it, I think, to appease the family so they would like my mom more, maybe. I don't know. And no one's been able to answer me on that. Well, then he ended up getting a bachelor's degree in biology from Simpson. He became a principal, and then he decided to become a minister, so then he went to a school for that. And he had some trouble there because he didn't believe all the philosophy and things they taught. He ended up going to Drake for a while, and he got another degree, and then he almost got his master's degree. My older brother was born after 2.5 years of marriage, then my sister, then I had another brother, and then I came along. Now, before I came along, Daddy had his degrees. He was in the military. He had become a lieutenant in the military reserves, and then he became a chaplain in the military reserves. And we moved around a lot from Iowa to Illinois. We ended up buying a home in Hackensack because his parents had a home in Minnesota. We lived close to him. And Mama went out there for me. So I was born in Minnesota. Mama said it was the coldest winter she ever remembered. Growing up in the Rockies, and to think that was the coldest winter. But she said it was armpit deep in snow. And, but about 3 years before I was born, maybe 4, Daddy started acting different. He used to be honest and direct and didn't lie to people. He was very loyal. And he began to start acting different, and his body began changing. And here is my dad and my mom, and he started shrinking in size. As you could tell, that's me. That was me as a baby when I was being christened by my grandfather. And you could tell that my dad was shrinking in size. And here's my daddy and me. Now, I've been told by my two older siblings that I was the apple of my daddy's eye, and if I was not with him and I did not see him, I would cry. And I still remember how much I loved him. And my dad would be okay one minute, and the next minute he'd just go off. He'd just be this angry person, and we didn't understand it. Here's another picture of my grandparents and me. That was my grandma and my granddad when I was christened. Here is letters my dad during the war. So I know he didn't talk about my mom because I've got a lot of the letters. Here's his minister things that I got from the church archives. And when he first became a minister, this is my dad in one of the books, when he married a couple, which that's kind of weird thinking of your dad being able to marry a couple. But this is Dad when he became a lieutenant. And this is my daddy when he graduated from Drake with another bachelor's degree. And that was in basically stuff from being a minister, theology. Okay, well here you could tell that my dad used to be a really good man and a really good person, and you could see. But this is something somebody wrote, and he put that about my dad and about his temper. And this was in 58, and that was like 3 years before I was born. And so you could tell he started changing. And okay, so then I come along, and we live in Minnesota, and then Dad falls on the ice in April. Can you imagine? But that's in Minnesota for you. And this was right before I was born. This I was just conceived at this point. And he falls on the ice, and he breaks 4 ribs and his shoulder. Now, my dad was only 38 years old when this happened. 37, actually, when this happened. And he was healthy. I mean, you could see he was healthy. So they went, and they fixed him up the best they could. Well, then a few months later, right after I was born, they went tobogganing. Him and my older brother went tobogganing. And the toboggan went over a hill, and it went boom, like that. Well, my daddy couldn't move. He couldn't get off the toboggan. And he rolled off. And they ended up toting him in a car to a hospital and found out he had broken his back. And they didn't understand why, because he was so young. Well, Daddy had military medical experience, so he started doing research on it. And he didn't have Google, like we do now. But he started doing research on it, and he said there's something major wrong. Well, since he was in the reserves, he ended up going to Fargo, North Dakota. And after being in there a month, they discovered he had Cushing's disease. Now, this was a new disease, and they knew very little about it. And they told him, they said, if you let us experiment on you to try and correct the symptoms from this disease, that, they'll do it for free. They would give him a small pension while they were doing it. And, he could take leave of absence from being a minister and from the military. And they were going to try and help him correct it. And they said, but you're probably going to end up dead because we know nothing about this disease. We know very little. And my dad, being the man that he was, he wanted to help people. And he knew that he'd probably die, and he said, well, I want to help people. And so they gave him a year to live at this point. And he said, well, that's fine. I want to do that, and I'm sure Mom and him talked about it and made this decision together. But that's what he did. All right, we're back. I had to take a quick break. This is Fitzsimmons, and he ended up having more training out there. And this is where he was, and this was a little chapel that they had where he learned how to be a surgical tech. This is him right before the hospital. Now see how huge he had gotten, and the moon face. And those are symptoms of, and a hump on the back, go figure, of Cushing's disease. Now, they went ahead and they operated on him. Now, if you look at him, you could see he had scars here, scars here, scars here. They did what they call corrective surgeries, and they did a bunch of them on him. And Mom told me he had 5 major surgeries and 8 minor ones. Now, he ended up, and they told Mom to keep him locked up in the hospital because he had started getting violent. And they told her that, she probably needed to leave him there, that they didn't know if he was going to get better or not. They said he was cured, but yet he was still not acting like his loving self. But Mom said, no, he's a father of my children. I'm sure he would be better off at home. He spent almost a year in the hospital, and it was in the newspapers. It was in, all of that about it. And so Daddy came home, and then the ministry retired him because of him being gone so long. They went ahead and retired him. And the reserves, because he lost his adrenal glands, so he could no longer be in the military, both at the same time. And this must have crushed my father deeply. And so he went out to Wyoming. He met somebody in the hospital, and he went out there to stay with him, and he went to school in Wyoming, but he was very tore up. And then he sent for my mom, and he decided to go back into teaching because that's all he could really do at this point. He couldn't be a minister, he couldn't be in the military, which about broke him. And going through all these treatments and everything, and he almost died once. They had cut his colon, and that he had a colostomy bag for a while, and he could barely move around. He was on crutches because he had osteoporosis so bad from the disease that it crumbled his bones inside. And when they cut his his colon, they gave him the colostomy. Well, then they surgically reattached it, and he almost died. They told my mom to come up there and his parents because they thought he was going to die, but he lived through it. And so we moved to Wyoming, and here he is. We had a bus accident when we came and visited the family. We moved to Wyoming. My mom moves out there, and we keep the Hackensack house as a summer house. And we start moving around because Daddy had trouble keeping a job. He had trouble controlling his temper. And we moved around a lot. And then he went ahead and worked as a teacher or counselor, whatever he could find. Mom got a job as a teacher in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and we lived in Carpenter for a while, and then we lived in Douglas, we lived in Casper, we lived in Powder River, which is now a ghost town, and my little brother was born in Rock Springs, and we moved and ended up in Cheyenne. My dad was violent. My mom finally said, I can't live like this anymore. So she got a restraining order, and he lived in Rollins and we lived in Wyoming. And on their wedding anniversary, the night before, he called my mom, and he had threatened her, a few times before. And he said, if you don't let me come home, because Mom had filed for divorce, and they were 8 days away from being divorced. And he said, if you don't let me come home, I'm going to kill myself. Well, Mom had heard it before, and she said, go ahead. Well, anyway, he did, on their 25th wedding anniversary. And at that point, my mom became so bitter she wouldn't talk about my dad. And I remembered my dad, and I remembered he'd be fine one minute and loving and caring, and then he would be, have such a temper. It's almost like an alcoholic. But he didn't drink at that point. It was the disease. And Mom would tell me a few things about my dad because I was always wanting to know. I remembered my dad, and I loved my dad. And, and I kind of understood he was sick. But my mom became so bitter because they were such good friends, and it just all crumbled and fell apart. And it was really hard for her. And my mom was older, and she had 3 young kids, and it was really hard for her. And she kind of went wacky, I think, for a while, which under those circumstances I can understand. But anyway, when he died, my mom, I can honestly say this about my mom too. My mom was a good Christian woman. She read her scriptures all the time, and I do not remember my mom lying to me as a child. That's one thing my mom didn't do. And I, would ask her questions, and she'd brush me off, or she was just bitter. You could tell how bitter she was. And so I wanted to know about my dad. And then everything, she told us when he died, she said that she was going to bury him in Denver, or actually in Fort Collins, in a military funeral. And she had taken his uniform out, and she found that in the trailer he was living in, and she was going to bury him in it. And then that's all she said. She left for a couple of days, and then she came back. And when she came back, we were at the house, and all of a sudden we got a phone call. And my uncle, and we had made our phone number unlisted, but it was the operator. They called. My uncle told my mom that the funeral would be the next day, Monday, in Iowa. And we did not have time to go. We couldn't go. My mom didn't want to go. And so we didn't go. And she told us that my aunt had stolen the body against her wishes, and yada, yada, yada. And that's what she told me. And I believed her. I didn't think nothing about it. And then I was angry at my dad's family because we weren't allowed to go. And so, I didn't question that, but I always kind of had hard feelings against them because of it. Well, when I got older, when I was 16, I would talk to my mom. My mom would just tell me negative stuff. And my brother took me aside, and he told me what a good dad my dad was, what a good husband, and he said he just got sick and he changed. And he said he just changed. And that was the first good thing I remembered someone saying about my dad. And I remembered loving him as a kid, and I understood stuff. And it was sad. It was sad. So I was always curious about him because I didn't know what surgeries he had. I didn't know about his disease, a lot about his disease. I didn't understand how they could say he's cured and yet he'd be angry all the time. I didn't understand all that. And I didn't know, but I understood about him, being ill. Well, when I was 16, I went to see my grandmother. And my grandmother had all these pictures of her ancestors on her wall, and she told me these are your ancestors, and she told me about them and stuff. And I had an attitude. When you're 16, you've got an attitude anyway. And she goes, "You don't like me very much, do you?" And I said, "No." I said, "You took my dad's body, and you buried him off in a corner by himself because he gave him into suicide." She said, "No, he didn't." I said, "Yes, he did, Grandma." I said, "I know that." And she talked, I don't remember what was said, but I said, "Grandma, I know the things my dad did because I was there." I said, "I was 7 years old, but I knew, and 7.5. I was 8 when he committed suicide." I said, "I know what he did, and I know that he was ill, and, I understand that. You should. You should understand that that was not your son, but he was ill." And anyway, it come to find out, in the 80s, my grandmother had my dad's body moved next to her husband. And she had to have my mom's help, and I told her I didn't appreciate the way she was mean to my mom. She became friends with my mom, and they worked together to move Dad's body. So it all worked out in the end. But I still didn't know a whole lot, and so when I began research, I found out things, and I found out mainly, because my mom at this point couldn't even remember everything that he had done. He was in the military, so I sent off for his medical records and his military records, and they came back, and they were free. I didn't pay a dime on them, and they were about this thick. The first batch was about this thick, and it told me the surgeries he had. It told me, "Kate, chewing on that, girl? Yuck." The kid told me about the surgeries he had, and told me about all the illnesses, and about his broken bones, and about everything to do with that. And it told me about his service in the military. They even had a discharge paper that he, from one of the times, because they sign up and get discharged, sign up and get discharged in the reserves, I guess. And one of those times, I have the actual one. Then I got loose leaf papers, and they explained even more. So I've got 2 notebooks full of stuff now that explains things to me. I also sent off for the funeral home records and found out my mom had released my dad's body, to his family. Now, I got to know my dad's family, and my Aunt Helen, who was a good Christian woman, never lied. I was sitting there talking to her, and I said, yeah, I don't understand the whole thing, because she said that when Dad died, he had called him the night before. That's how they knew that he had died and all that. And she said, no, that's not what happened. She called him, and she called your grandfather. And I looked at him, and I said, no, that's not what she told me. And she said, well, hon, that's what happened. And I said, okay. And I explained to her about stuff, and she said, well, the funeral home guy had a plane, and he went and got your dad's body, and he brought him back. Well, see, everything of my father's had disappeared. And that was another story in itself. I mean, it was all gone. Mom said there was a trailer full of stuff, and then it was all gone. And so as I got older, I began to research, and I found out she filed a will. Now, why would you file a will if everything was gone? Okay, she filed a will, and I believe my mom sold stuff. She got rid of all of his stuff. The only thing my mom kept, I don't see, do you see the jewelry box? Was this jewelry box. My dad made it. He gave it to her, and that's one of the things she kept. The other thing was a picture of him when he had his surgeries with all his scars. The rest of the pictures were gone. The rest of documents by my father was gone. No clothes, no nothing. She got rid of everything. And I understand it now, being older. That was her way of dealing with it, dealing with the grief, dealing with everything that happened. She didn't get rid of stuff. She put it up. The pictures, the few mementos she put up. She ended up bringing them out later, and I ended up getting them. And I've shared some with my brother and other stuff, but she just put everything up. And that wedding picture that I showed you is the original. She had kept that, and I never saw it as a child. From the time Dad left home, I never saw it. She put it up until she got a lot older. And I think it took her a long time to get over it, but that's how I found it. I got from the military records, I got funeral home records, I got my dad's school records, I found stuff on Ancestry, his enlistment, I found a few things on Family Search, I found the funeral homes, both of them were in Iowa. I found where they moved his body. There is records everywhere. Even though a courthouse may burn down, there is still records. And this is the story of my dad. It's a sad one. It's a sad one, but he's in a better place. My mom's in a better place. And things happen for a reason. We just don't know why. We have to trust in our Father in heaven and in our Savior Jesus about why they happen. And I do. I have a lot of faith. I have a lot of faith that things are for our good. And that's one of the reasons I was so curious, because I want to know about my dad and his family. And I think that everybody, when you grow up without somebody, I think you want to know. And this is Katy, who hasn't said a whole lot. You want to tell them anything before we say goodbye? Do you want to tell them anything? No. Do you want to tell them anything? You've been really good. First, being quiet. This is her first day out of school. How do you feel? Are you glad to be out of school for the summer? Are you? What are we going to do? We're going to do a lot of arts and crafts stuff, aren't we? I'm going to teach her how to do clay and make little pendants and stuff out of clay. What else? Oh, we're going to make a kitty cat. You want to make a kitty cat, don't you? Yeah, we joined an art guild, and we're going to do a bunch of art stuff, and Katy loves art stuff. And we signed her up for a week of an art camp, which she said she's really going to like. You looking forward to that? 11th in June. Yeah. She's glad to be out of school, though. Do you miss school? You miss school already? No way! This is Ginger Hawn Cooper and Katy Cooper. Look at that's her some more. I'm moving. She's on this bucket because remember how she used to sit and you go, oh, you know. So we put her on a bucket so she sits up a little higher. But anyway, so pushing the bucket. This is Katy Cooper and Ginger Hawn Cooper, the Determined Genealogist, signing off for now. And happy hunting, even with those skeletons in your closet. And if there's anything we can do to help, like the video. If it's sad, say it's sad. It's okay. I don't mind. Good feedback, bad feedback, I don't care. Put it down. But if there's something you're looking for, put it down. Let me see if we can help. Have a great day.